We are going to continue to add some layers here to this discussion about fretboard fluency as a major building block for our bluegrass improvisation. And we don't dip too deeply into kind of traditional music theory here, but this is one layer that I want to kind of introduce to the conversation that's pretty specific to a lot of songs that you're going to experience in the world of bluegrass and fiddle tunes. A mode, when you see a mode, if you see a lot of folks talking about the modes in music, it's essentially another way to look at kind of a note grouping, kind of like a scale. In essence, a major scale is a kind of mode. Other kinds of scales and other kinds of music are modes. It's possible that the term modes and scales could be sort of interchangeable. The concept of the Mixolydian mode is essentially a major scale, like a G major scale. But instead of the natural 7, it's a flatted 7. So from the lowest available to the highest. And that's an important distinction to make because, again, there's a lot of songs we're going to play, like Red Hair Boy, Salt Creek, Old Joe Clark, that sort of use that group of notes. That can be the Mixolydian mode, or, again, I think successful usage of this we don't have to consciously say this is the Mixolydian mode. And I think because, like we've covered in these sort of layers of complexity in bluegrass improvisation, majors and minors can kind of exist together. That flat 7 can also exist with the natural 7 because, like in a tune like Red Hair Boy, if I'm improvising, I'm going to be playing from the 5 to the 1, and I might use that F sharp to just help me get back to the G. So because we're including this flat 7 doesn't mean that the natural 7 or the F sharp is off limits now. So again, there's just different ways to sort of absorb the concept here or understand what this layer is about. I want you to understand what or how this exists in the world of the big world of music theory as a mode, but again, in our sort of practical bluegrass application, it's a major scale with a flat 7. To that point, as I'm traveling up and down the fretboard, improvising over songs like Red Haired Boy, Salt Creek, Old Joe Clark, one of the things that I also recognize is that the notes of the G major scale with an F natural are also the same notes as a C major scale. So, and that's helpful to me. Sometimes I recognize that just as I use major scales to inform musical and melodic decisions that I'm going to make, I don't want my improvisation to sound like a scale, but I can use that layer of, oh wow, I'm in the key of G, but I'm using the C major scale to help inform some note choice and things like that. Or like we noticed in our three shape discussion, those groups of notes can help us feel a little more connected to melodies and what's possible as we're improvising. So those are the main things to think about as far as this layer, the Mixolydian mode, the major scale with a flat 7, or even again the way it would work out is the major scale up a 4th. If I'm in the key of G, up a 4th is to the key of C, or the major scale of C, but kind of included as a layer. And I know that comes across as complex, but that's a good reiteration of the point, is these layers are complex, but improvisation, as it is analogous to speech, helps remind us that that's what's going on here, and it takes time to build. And we have these practice tracks to sort of hear these things. And that's the way I want you to start working with this idea here, is use these practice tracks. And even before that, just get a G chord here and think about a G major scale with that F natural. Right? You can hear that kind of Red Hair Boy-ish kind of sound, or Old Joe Clark. Very much in the key of G. In the key of D, it's going to be a C natural and not a C sharp. So if I'm really, being honest about how this might show up in my improvisation as a layer, all the layers that we've covered to this point are essentially in play. And I know that's, if you're hearing this for the first time, it can maybe lead you to the conclusion that well, there's not a lot of notes that are wrong or off limits, or if I land on them, should I call those a mistake? And that's kind of a positive thing about improvisation, is that a lot of times what we think are the wrong note or a bad note or a mistake are really either a layer that we're not recognizing, or back to some of the initial sort of improvisational spirit, maybe we've just reacted too harshly for what we thought was a mistake. And again, through this sort of mindful practice and taking our time, recognizing what these layers feel like, what they sound like, we can start feeling them kind of be integrated more into our improv, in our bluegrass jam, on stage, that kind of thing. That's the way it's always worked with me. Here's a nice little layer. Here's something I can include into some improvisation, kind of like a new vocabulary word. And the more, at first it feels a little conscious, but eventually it can show up a little more unconsciously in my playing. And that can happen here too. Again, as we kind of round out this building block of fretboard fluency as a major way to improve our bluegrass improvisation. So I'm going to give you some demonstrations here of a 1 and then a flat 7 in the key of G. That'll be the F chord. 1, 4, 5 backing track to practice over. So I'll give you some examples here. 1 and 2 and 1, 2, 3, 4. So I think you could hear how that F natural was fairly prominent in the choices that I was making. And just as I said earlier, a lot of times, and I feel this a lot when I go up the neck, that was me feeling a little more connected to the C major scale shape. Again, those are all going to be really friendly notes. And again, as an improviser, what I hope to continue to improve on is my, strengthening kind of sense of melody and ability to notice things like themes or motifs, and we'll continue to talk about that down the road. But the bottom line, again, I want you to recognize that these are all potential layers that we can use. They're useful. They can, for you, equal new opportunities in your improvisation there that will help you continue to discover your own voice, maybe move past playing somebody else's licks or something that you've done 100 times. Another thing that I hear a lot in our improvisational conversation is, how can I break out of this rut of playing the same thing every time? And so this is a way to get that conversation started, along with some other things that we're going to continue to talk about. So I'll give you one more demonstration here with this Mixolydian mode, the major scale with the flat 7 in the key of D. 1 and 2 and 1, 2, 3, 4.